Greetings, I'm Sophis. Today I want to show you the potential of the War Golem, one of the new units we got with Rise from Ruin. It looks unassuming enough, a new construct that has a niche. But the interesting thing about it is that it has a lot of unit type tags on it. It is a construct but also magic origin, and on top of that it is a fiend unit. If that wasn't enough, it's a magic fighter with a repeating attack, a teleport, and a single shot area attack. To make it very strong and play to its advantages, I'm focusing on a critical hit strategy with a side of useful debuffs. The War Golem in this build gets the following enchantments: Fiery Projectiles, Fated Projectiles, Accursed Projectiles, Constricting Focus, Leyline Focus, Focus of Devastation, Siege Magic, Relentless Might, Flame Burst Weapons, Accursed Armors, and Prescient Circlets. In other words, it gets a lot of buffs with this build. This all piles up due to the magic fighter unit type being eligible at times for 2 enchantments on a tome, enchantments that would usually be for entirely separate units. What you really need to know about this combination of enchantments is this: accounting for them, its fiend status, and a hero with 3 chaos signature skills, we're talking about a unit with 95% crit chance before getting any Infernal Might procs from Relentless Might. On a unit that we're giving 40% extra damage thanks to Leyline Focus and Siege Magic, you'll also be dealing a lot of burning or Ghostfire damage. On top of that, you can constrict enemies as well as break their defense modes. This build also makes use of the Vision of Destiny trait. This is a crit build with lots of chaos affinity. It would be foolish to pass up the extra crit rate and lifesteal for units. The War Golem aside, I would recommend fielding summoners. They have buffs for magic origin units, which your Angry Fiery Scorpions are. Another flat damage buff, just for 1 unit of course, but it can make a difference. Plus, you get to summon additional units into battle, which is always useful no matter what you're playing. Campaign-wise, you're made for sieging. Not only the fact that the army that you're fielding is filled with siege breakers, you'll have more special siege projects than you can count. You can even combo Conqueror's Edict and Foresee Downfall. That gives everybody plus 25% critical hit chance, which can compensate for not having the signature skill buffs to crits. By all means, pick your poison with the other options, but I'd recommend going for these 2 first and foremost. It's also worth noting that these scorpions are very expensive on upkeep. You can make that a little better thanks to the small amount of shadow affinity that this build has. The Imperium tree has an upkeep reduction that will go a long way to make them more affordable, which is good since you'll hit a point where you can summon one each turn if you need to. And as magic origin units, your summoner culture will let you promote them with a unique resource that you collect from the map. I'll talk about heroes here since this is relevant for the early game. Mystic culture in general is very squishy early on. The melee you have on hand is questionable, and your backline is very vulnerable. You'll have a summon early on, but it is another battle mage. So my recommendation is that you make your heroes the front line, starting with your ruler. I've used this combination recently in another build, but the Battle Saint Wizard King is a very formidable frontliner. Have your ruler hold the line. The channeling ritual that puts you in defense mode synergizes pretty well with Battle Saint, and you'll have easier early battles. I recommend the same for any preset heroes you make with the faction. Pick melee classes, maybe with a caster class in the middle for crowd control and damage. Since this strategy relies on a tier 3 tome, of course that it will be a while until you get your War Golems. However, there's a small trick you can try to speed it up a small amount. Philosopher's Soldiers is one of the unlocks in the Empire tree that can be combined with the Summoner's power to promote units, giving you a quick burst of knowledge. That said, it is further down the tree and you would be promoting non-War Golem units, so you might want to save it instead and just wait for the research to unlock. Now let's go quickly over society and form traits. This build focuses on summoning and critical damage, so it only makes sense to go Mana Channelers and Vision of Destiny, picking the Chaos Vision. We're playing Summoner Mystics, of course. With form traits, we're trying to favor the Summoner, since that is the culture unit that will make it to the late game. As a support, having Slippery to avoid more damage after being caught in melee, and Arcane Focus for a little extra damage. The last trait can be anything, but adaptable is a pretty universal benefit. Let's go over the tomes. At tier 1, you can decide which one you want first, as it will define your earlier fights. On one hand, with the melee ruler you could go for Pyromancy and summon the lesser magma spirits. On the other hand, you can start with Tentacle and rely on the combat summon to be an improvised frontline, or disrupt the enemy backline. There's no right answer, either work. For Pyromancy, we of course want the summon. That aside, Fiery Projectiles is the other priority. You can grab the combat spells if you'd like. With Tentacle, the situation is similar. You want the combat summon and Constricting Focus. The rest is optional. At tier 2, we need Materium for later tomes, and thankfully there's two good candidates. We'll begin with Tome of Artificing. Although the War Golem sadly does not benefit from the critical hit enchantment in this tome, it does benefit from Siege Magic. A flat 10% bonus damage is nothing to scoff at. With Tome of the Construct, it's the same as always. Linked Mines and Compounding Defense. You can grab the Cascading Commands, but your best buff will come later. At tier 3, this build gets a little unorthodox. You'll want 4 tomes for this build. So, as a quick reminder for those of you who don't know about this, when you can't find the tome you want on the normal carousel, you click Show Tome Library and you can unlock any tome you have the affinity for from it. With that said, we start with Tome of the Warlord. Of course, we want the War Golem, and you should try to make it your first unlock if possible. Then, Relentless Might. Since we're focusing on crits, you want Conqueror's Edict to help you with that in sieges. Then, for general use, Might of the Battlefield. As usual, the Chaos Bolstering Matrix will make it a very strong buff spell. After that, we have Tome of Terramancy. This is what we got Materium Affinity for. Leyline Focus gives a 30% bonus damage to your War Golems. Seismic Shock has a niche use case in this build, since you can use it to apply Slowed, which helps inflict Constricted. Then we get to our third tome at this tier with Devastation. Here we want Focus of Devastation and Flame Burst weapons, extra crit chance and the ability to end defense modes. The defense mode break is even more interesting when you consider that the War Golems have an AoE cone attack. The last tome at this tier is Prophecies. Fated Projectiles and Prescient Circlets are another set of double buffs. Precognition during defense mode, and even more critical hit chance. Foresee Downfall combos with Conqueror's Edict for crits during sieges, and Battle Divination is worth casting for the first turn of combat. Now we get to tier 4, a point where other builds would reach tier 5, but it's worth noting that every single tome from start to finish buffed the War Golems in some way, without exception. So I find that more important than following the typical tome progression. It's difficult not to consider Tome of Calamity when there is so much Chaos Affinity in this build, as well as burning damage. Might as well turn some of that to Ghostfire. Same as always, Accursed Projectiles and Accursed Armors are what you want here. That should be enough in theory. 9 tomes, more than enough research for a match. But if you play long enough to go further, I would recommend Chaos Channeling, primarily for Scion of Flame, so you can give your culture units and heroes immunity to burning. And Flamer Focus would give your summoners a secondary attack. I have to say it ended up much stronger than I expected, but that's in great part thanks to all the weird synergies that the War Golem has due to its unit type and its tags, letting it benefit from a lot of effects all at once. It outperforms some baseline mythics, and can be summoned with more ease than them, not to mention the freedom to promote them at will thanks to the summoner culture. And that's all I have for you today. I hope you're having a good day, and see you in the next one.